Okay, the argument that I'll make today is that markets do a good job of maximizing surplus in society under a couple of conditions. Okay, so we're going to talk about efficiency. Um, and the objective here is to maximize total surplus in a society, among a group of people. And we'll think about this two different ways. First, let's imagine that we are in charge of the economy and we can make decisions along the lines of how much of a good gets produced, who should produce the good, and who should receive the good. And we do that purely to make society as happy as we can. Okay, this is sort of the idea that economists would describe as a benevolent social planner. Okay, it's also, if we want to get political, it's sort of like the socialist ideal. Okay, the government thinks about like what the country can produce. The government takes charge of production, and the government takes charge of distribution of goods. And in an ideal country, all the government is trying to do is make everyone as happy as possible. Okay, so for this like thought idea that we're doing today, all this benevolent social planner wants to do is make people as happy as they can, maximize total surplus. Let's imagine an economy. What gets produced are widgets. Okay, and this economy could produce up to 6 widgets, and it has a handful of different factories with different costs of producing widgets, and a handful of consumers with different values that they get from widgets. So, like, here there's one person who gets $130 of value from widgets. Actually, like one person who gets $130, someone else who gets $90, someone who gets $100, $120, $80. Now, this benevolent social planner thinks about, well, if I were to hand out widgets, who gets the first widget? It makes sense to give it to the person who has the highest value of widgets, right? The consumer who has the highest value. So the first person to get it will be the person who has a value of 130. And the second person to get a widget will be the person who has a value of 120, then 110, then 100, and in descending order. Now, to tie this to socialism, there's a quote from uh, uh, Karl Marx that the ideal of socialism is from each according to his or her ability, to each according to his or her need. Okay? This is sort of capturing that idea. First, we give the widgets to the people who need them the most. Okay. Then there are a variety of factories that could produce widgets at different costs. There's a factory that could produce widgets at $120 a piece. There's one that could produce them at $60. There's one that has a cost of $80, and so forth. Okay. Well, the social planner thinks about how to use these factories. If we are going to produce only one widget, it makes sense to produce that first widget at the factory that has the lowest cost. So, first widget would get produced at the factory that has a cost of $40. Second widget would get produced at the factory that has the second lowest cost, $60, and so forth. So the social planner comes up with this plan of what would happen if one widget gets produced. Well, it would go to the person who has a value of $130, and it would get produced at the factory that has a cost of $40. This makes sense, I hope. Okay? And goes down the list. Then the social planner thinks about the total surplus generated. Okay? The total surplus, the value to the consumer minus the cost of production, is the total surplus. Okay? Well, the first widget would have a value of $130 to someone, and it could be produced at a cost of $40. So it would generate $90 of surplus. Okay, social planner thinks about, should we produce that The social planner says definitely yes. Okay, it increases social surplus, or it increases total surplus in society. So using that factory to produce a widget to give to the person who values it at $130 is good for society. The second widget, if a second widget is produced, it would go to someone who values it at $120. It costs $60 to get produced, and so the total value is $60. And so the social planner says, yeah, that's a good idea as well. Producing that second widget would increase total surplus in society. And the third widget would produce $30 of total surplus. So yeah, let's produce that one. The fourth widget, would bring value of $100 to someone. It would cost $100 to produce. Yeah, we could go ahead and do that. So I put in, like this is kind of indifferent. Now, producing a fifth widget, it would go to someone who values that widget at $90, and it would cost $120 to produce. These costs keep going up because first the most efficient factories or producers make widgets, and then less and less efficient. I mean, that's one way of thinking why the costs go up. Or it could be that these represent opportunity costs, and putting more and more widgets into, or like producing more and more widgets means taking away resources that could be very valuable in other areas, increasingly valuable. At any rate, the costs are going up. The people who had the greatest need for widgets have gotten their widgets. So by the fifth widget, the value of the widget to a consumer is greater than the cost of production. So producing it would result in negative value to society. Okay, same for the sixth widget. So if this social planner has to think about how much to produce, the answer is produce 4. Okay, so there's this symbol that I'm using here, new symbol, Q hat equals 4. Okay, so Q hat will stand for what is socially optimal. In other words, what maximizes total surplus, or we could describe it as what is efficient. There's nothing else that could be produced that would make people happier without hurting someone. Okay, so what is socially optimal for this society is to produce 4 widgets. They would be given to the people with the 4 highest values, and they would be produced at the factories that have the 4 lowest production costs. That's the social planner's plan. Okay? Again, if I'm in charge of the economy and all I want to do is make my people as happy as I possibly can, that's my plan. And there's no market involved here. Okay, next. Let's forget about that plan. Let's forget about the social planner trying to make people happy and just let the market do its thing. Okay? Go to kind of the other extreme, a free market. In a free market, this is the type of thing that we've analyzed before. There's a demand curve, there's a supply curve. And given these people with these preferences, okay, we can graph demand at a price of $130. At a price of $130 right here, there is one person who'd be willing to purchase a widget. So that's this point right here. Oh, this is a terrible graph. That's supposed to be one widget at $130. Okay. If the price goes to $120, there would be 2 people who want to purchase widgets. So this is supposed to be 2 people would purchase widgets at $130. I hope you see how like that same table of people and their values for widgets could generate a demand curve. And the demand curve tells us, for widgets, for example, there would be 100. I'm sorry. At a price of $100, there would be 4 people who want to purchase widgets. Okay. Now, there's also a supply curve. If the cost or if the price in the market is 140, I'm sorry, if the price in the market is $40, then there'd only be one firm willing to produce a widget. So that is this point right here on the supply curve. There would be one widget produced at a price of $40. If the price were $80, then the first, second, and third widgets would all get produced. So at a price of, again, $80, there would be 3 widgets produced. So 3 at $80, and so forth. Okay, so that same set of people, same set of producers, if we take out the social planner and just like, people, just come up with a market, you all sort this out on your own, okay? Government is going to stay out of this. There'd be some supply, there'd be some demand, and then there'd be a market equilibrium. And this market would be in equilibrium, of course, where supply and demand intersect. Okay? That point right there is the equilibrium. And there's an equilibrium price of $100. So I've marked this even though it's over at the edge of the screen. Go away. You can't see this. Okay. The equilibrium price is $100. At that equilibrium price of $100, there would be 4 people who want to purchase widgets, right? Person with a value of 130, 120, 110, 100. And if the price were $100, there'd be 4 firms willing to supply widgets. Yeah? So at a price of $100, there'd be 4 widgets demanded and 4 widgets supplied. And so that's the equilibrium quantity. Okay, now remember the stars stand for equilibrium in this market. Okay. So here we have the outcome of the competitive market. Okay, in the competitive market, there'd be a price of $100, 4 would get produced. That's actually the same quantity that the social planner would select, right? Social planner would have produced 4 widgets and would have given those 4 widgets to the 4 people with the highest value, right? Oh, that's actually what happens for consumers in this market as well. 4 widgets get produced, and they are purchased by the 4 people with the highest value of widgets. The social planner would also require that the 4 factories with lowest cost of producing widgets would produce them. That's the same thing that happens in the market. If the price of widgets is $100, there are 4 firms willing to supply widgets, and it is the 4 firms with the lowest costs. So the outcome is the same. Same quantity gets produced. The goods go to the same people, go to the same consumers, and they are produced by the same factories. What happens in a competitive market is the same as what a social planner would do. So I've written that here as like Q star equals Q hat. Okay, again, what happens in a competitive market, actually, I can expound on that. What happens in the competitive market in terms of quantity produced as well as which consumers receive and which producers produce, which consumers receive, and which producers produce the widgets. All of those things, what happens in the competitive market is also what is socially ideal. It is what maximizes total surplus. So another way of saying this is that the competitive free market maximizes total surplus in society. Okay, this is a very deep philosophical statement, okay? And I'm not joking about that. This is important to economists, that at least under the right circumstances, the outcomes of a market are fully efficient. And there would be no way that a social planner could, or anyone, sorry, could take control of the economy and produce things in a way that generate more total surplus for society. Okay, it's just not possible to beat what would happen in the free market. And so, I mean, economists almost universally are big fans of free markets. Um, Again, at least under the right circumstances, free markets are unbeatable. Um, Markets produce what is socially optimal. There's no way that someone could take control of the economy and improve the outcome overall. Um, so, um, you know, control can only make things worse. Okay. So, you know, I I feel like this statement or these statements have such political implications that I am almost indoctrinating people with propaganda. I'll try to balance this out a little bit, but it's a strong argument for why markets work well, and we can get into history and no. In this course, we're not going to get into history and politics, but for the most part, countries with free markets have been very successful. Grayson, right? Yeah.
Would control relate to like price controls, like price floors and price ceilings?
Would it relate to price controls and price ceilings? It could. The thing is, there's nothing a person or a government could do that would make society happier than what the free market would do. So yes, it can include price controls. It can include minimum wages. Um, uh, when you've heard me talk about minimum wages, union wages, I have not been very positive toward those things, even though, I mean, at this point, I have a union that represents me, and it's going to bargain with university administration to pay me a higher wage. I like that personally, but I recognize as an economist, it is not in the interest of society overall. You also hear me talk about prescription drug prices. And, I think of my grandfather who paid hundreds or $1,000 a month for his prescription drugs. And yes, it would be nice to have a cap on prescription drug prices, but it will reduce total surplus in society and, in fact, can hurt consumers because the production goes down. And so I have to recognize that, there are all these programs that might sound nice or policies that might sound nice. in controlling the economy, price controls or output controls, like saying how much of something should be produced or the maximum that could be produced, they might sound good, but they are not in the overall best interest of society. Now, I'm going to provide some conditions, but first, let me say like reasons why free market economy might in fact be better than the controlled economy. And again, when I say controlled economy, I'm not talking about evil or incompetent people running the economy. People who genuinely want to make the economy good for the citizens of the country. One reason is knowledge. Okay, knowledge of value and costs. Okay, remember, like the social planner is trying to determine how many widgets should get produced in this country based on people's value of widgets and then distribute them to the people who need the widgets. This requires that the social planner have knowledge of what all the people in society want. Okay? Similarly, on the production side, it needs to know what the costs of production are at all the different factories. Okay? That's a lot of knowledge that it needs to have. For the market to be efficient, the individual people need to have knowledge of their own value of the good. Each person needs to know how much they value the good at, and each factory or each producer needs to know their cost of producing the good. It's a lower requirement for knowledge. Okay? It's almost the bare minimum. If anyone knows what a widget is worth to you, it's you, right? And so it's not such a stretch to think consumers know what they want and how much something is worth to them. It's a bigger stretch to think that the government knows that information. Okay, same for the production side. The factory that produces the widget has the best idea of what it costs to produce a widget. Okay, so this information about the values and costs, again, it seems that's something that is much easier to satisfy just on an individual. Like each person, each producer needs to know their value instead of like the government needs to know that for everyone. Okay. The second requirement is, or the second thing is incentive. Okay. If the government takes control of the factories and says, your factory is going to produce a widget, like it or not, it really doesn't give the same benefit to people working at the factory, owning the factory, to produce a widget, as the market, which says if you produce a widget and sell it, you will get $20 of profit. That motivates people. There's an incentive for people to produce. And we think especially about incentives on the production side, but there's also an incentive for consumers to be honest about whether something is worth the money to them. If the government is handing out widgets based on how much people value them, I'm just going to tell the government I would value a widget at $900. Please give me one. Even if, my real value is $60. If the government relies on my report of my value of a widget, I'm going to lie. But if I am spending my own money, I have an incentive to purchase the good only if I value it more than the cost of producing it. So there are incentives for both consumers and producers to behave in the right way in a market economy. And in a controlled economy, there's not, okay? So the government essentially needs to tell the producers, you must do this or else. And needs to tell consumers, you will get this allocation of goods, like it or not. Okay, so those are, all my arguments in favor of market economies. And again, almost all economists think there's a very strong argument for market economies. Um, you know, as I say, history has some lessons. Of course, there's a big lesson in Eastern Europe during the second half of the 1900s, right? Second half of the 20th century in socialism, right? And governments trying to focus on producing and allocating goods in order to meet the needs of their people instead of maximizing profits. Okay, then like the best natural experiment would be East Germany versus West Germany, where the standard of living 50 years after the war was twice as high in West Germany as in East Germany. They started out the same country. One had a market economy, one had a socialist economy. The one with the market economy developed much faster. And, and people were happy with the freedom. Okay? Freedom to do as they chose. The East German government was known for being like very harsh in controlling people and telling them you must do this, you must do that. As a matter of fact, like the final proof, as far as I'm concerned, is people wanted to move from East Germany to West Germany, right? The East German government had to build a wall to keep its people in, to keep them from leaving the country. All of these are sort of evidence that really life was better in West Germany than in East Germany. And the main difference between those countries was after World War II, West Germany had a market economy, East Germany did not. Now, there are some limitations. Market economies are not efficient. In other words, they do not maximize social surplus when one of three things is true. By the way, this all goes back to like the first week of class. I talked about Mankiw's principles of economics. One of them, probably number 5, is that markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. Okay, that's what I just discussed. But the next one was sometimes the government can improve on outcomes. And that's where I'm going now. Reasons for market failure include externalities, market power, and externalities, market power, and information, incomplete information. What we're going to do for this week and next week is in the area of externalities. And later, we will move into different market structures and talk about things like monopoly. Okay? There's also, okay, so you're familiar with a monopoly is a single seller. Okay. And a monopoly, and a monopoly tries to set its own price. Okay, in some ways, unions are like monopolies. Okay, so if we had a market and one side of the market was dominated by a union, it is essentially the sole labor union. It is the sole seller of labor in that market, and it can set its own price. Okay, and this is along the lines of price control, and it results in inefficient outcomes. There's also, though, something called a monopsony. Okay, monopsony. This will be a new term. Is a single buyer. Okay, of labor. So, I guess monopsonies are equally bad for economies. Again, it's a matter of market power. A monopsony can set its own, or can set the wages in the market. It'll try to keep wages artificially low, below what the competitive wages would have been. And usually the case where we see monopsonies are in the labor market, where there's a single employer of a type of worker in some area with some type of skill. And, to give another example that's, I guess, close to home, literally, here in Burlington, Burlington area, how many employers are there of economists? I mean, really one, Elon University. Um, if you're an economist, professional economist, I should, academic economist. Sorry, I should have said that. But even other jobs for economists are scarce. The market for professors in Burlington, North Carolina, is pretty limited. Okay, there is a single employer of professors in this area. And so perhaps this university is a monopsonist. Okay, that's the opposite of a monopolist, a single buyer of labor. Well, if so, then the market is already inefficient, and then we get into complicated stuff, like and that is essentially the argument in favor of labor unions, is that they combat the inefficiency of a monopsony employer. Okay, but again, markets will fail to be efficient generally in these three cases: when there are externalities, when there's market power, or information. So, this slide repeats what I just said. Market equilibrium maximizes surplus. Again, in this ideal market with accurate information, no market power, no externalities. Now, let's go to externalities. Externalities are behavior that impacts someone who has no say in the decision. Okay, did not consent to the behavior. Okay. When I produce and sell a widget, I am half of a transaction. The buyer is another half of the transaction. We both agree to the transaction. But if the production and consumption of the widget impacts someone else, that's an externality. Okay, if you go and get vaccinated, and that vaccine your vaccine impacts other people, that's an externality. Those other people didn't make a decision to be vaccinated. Now, externalities can be positive or negative. Okay, again, positive or negative. Negative externalities: sound pollution. Okay, you hear the train going by and interrupting our class. Did we agree to that? No. Okay, is the behavior of that train impacting us? Yes. So, see, I even have that right here on my list: noise pollution. I time things perfectly to oh, no. Examples of negative externalities. Pollution. And we think mostly of environmental pollution, but also noise. Yeah. In your dorm or in your apartment, this can be a source of concern, right? You've lived near someone who's noisy. They keep you up at night. You're trying to study and they're causing noise. And again, that's an externality that impacts you probably negatively. Um, light pollution. One thing that's happening right now that excites me a lot is Elon Musk's SpaceX corporation is launching a satellite internet network or constellation. It's called thousands of satellites floating up overhead, transmitting internet signals, which promises to bring high-speed internet to virtually every place on the globe, including places where it's inefficient to run physical lines, which includes my house. For some reason, the internet companies have decided my house doesn't deserve anything better than old-fashioned DSL, and I get 1.5 megabits down, which, if you know things, it's ridiculously slow, and Elon Musk is promising speeds 100 times that fast, and it's lovely. Okay, I'm going to buy it as soon as it comes out, and SpaceX is going to be happy about selling it to me because they're going to profit from it. However, astronomers are not very happy about having thousands of satellites floating around in the sky, reflecting light back to Earth that looks like new stars or new asteroids or new comets. They're going to have to figure out where all these satellites are, map out their locations and their orbits and whatever else. It's going to cause a problem for astronomers, and they are concerned about this light pollution. Okay, other example of externalities. I mean, kind of personal hygiene. Coughing, right? Especially for the past year. Coughing is a problem. You can infect people with your breath, sneezing. Okay, flatulence. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it really is an externality, right? You're on an airplane, you're in a car, you're in an elevator, whatever. Okay, other examples of externalities. Let's put smoking here. Now, to be clear, the externality associated with smoking is not the damage you do to yourself. Okay? Smoking creates negative externalities, but it's not the danger to yourself. It's the impact on other people. Okay? Secondhand smoke. That's the externality. Does that make sense? Okay? If I decide I'm going to start smoking, I'm consenting to that transaction or that behavior. I'm deciding that I'm going, and presumably I can make an efficient decision about the benefit, the trade-off between like nicotine right now versus cancer in 30 years. And I can decide what's in my interest. Okay. The problem with smoking is it impacts my family. Okay. Same for alcohol. Okay. Unfortunately, alcohol is a big source of externalities. And again, it's not the problems that people bring on themselves. Okay? The health problems, um, absenteeism from work, dangerous behaviors. Those are not the externalities. It's how consumption of alcohol impacts other people that is the externality. Okay? So alcohol is associated, for example, with alcohol is associated with violent behavior. Okay, that's the externality. Sort of leading into the next thing, driving. Driving creates externalities, if there's one thing that you all do on a regular basis that really causes externalities to other people, it's driving. And there are two types of externalities. One are the collisions. Okay? I mean, whenever you get on the road, you put other people at risk of collisions. Okay? And that's a problem. Okay? And you make it worse with alcohol or texting, but simply by being on the road, you create a risk for someone. Okay? The other's a simpler thing, congestion. Okay? If you get on the road, you slow down the other cars on the road. And again, like congestion, traffic jams, those are examples of externalities. Okay, and then the final thing I've put here, overuse of common resources. Um, yeah, like using, let's see, or for example, fishing or hunting. One person catching a fish out in the ocean reduces how many fish are available to other people. And it's different when it's a common resource than when it is a privately owned resource that's being sold to someone. Okay, when it is sold, someone already owns it and consents to the transfer, and it impacts nobody else. It doesn't derive anyone else of a fish. Again, if the fish is being bought and sold in a privately owned fish is being sold. But if it is a publicly owned fish, my catching the fish means it's not available to other people. I'm taking away their fish. Now, those are the negative externalities. And often we do think of negative externalities, but there are also positive externalities, behaviors that impact other people positively. First thing on my list right here, vaccinations. If you get vaccinated, that has a positive impact on other people. I've talked about my wife in public health. What she does is study the spread of disease, especially through social networks. And you know, people in her area propose all kinds of crazy ideas. Or actually, her field is divided into two camps right now. One are the people who think our vaccination priorities should be based on medical risk, and the other group of people think that it should be based on transmission risk. So there are two ways that we can protect old boomers against COVID. One is by vaccinating them. Okay, I bring up those old people because they're at the highest risk. One is by vaccinating them. The other is by vaccinating the people who come into contact with them. Okay, so if we want to protect your grandma and grandpa, we can vaccinate you. And then you can go and hug grandma and grandpa. And that actually provides benefit to grandma and grandpa as well as you. So we've kind of got three people vaccinated for the price of one. Okay, that's a simple version of it. But in fact, like this is complicated right now. It could be that the efficient way to hand out vaccines is not to the people who get the most private benefit from them, but the people who provide the largest positive externality. So, positive externalities, vaccinations, face masks. I think we understand at this point that wearing a face mask protects people around you even more than it protects you yourself, right? You've probably heard this lesson plenty over the past year. I think this is hard. This is in part of the difficulty the US and other countries have had with face masks because we're accustomed to risky behavior, making our own decisions about whether to engage in risky behavior based on the risk to ourselves. Okay? I mean, if I want to ride my motorcycle without a helmet on, I'm not sure why that should be a problem. Okay? If it only impacts me, why should I be required to use safety equipment? And so then by extension, like, how are masks different? Why should it not be my choice whether to protect myself with a mask? And the difference is essentially pollution, right? Not wearing a mask pollutes the air around you. And that's sort of the basis for mask mandates, is the government does have a role in controlling pollution because it impacts people around. So that's my like explanation of face masks and like where to classify them. Okay, washing hands. And again, externalities, right? Um, Even back in the days when before COVID, you didn't want to shake the hand of someone who might have had a dirty hand. So if that other person washed their hands after using the bathroom, that provided a benefit to you as well. Okay, that's always been the case. Washing hands protects other people as well as yourself. Recycling. Um, I put this down sort of the opposite of pollution. Recycling is complicated, but we recycle things we think because it's good for the earth and provides benefits to other people by reducing pollution. Boy, is this complicated. Um, uh, in fact, John Oliver. Does anyone watch John Oliver's segments? What's the name of his show? Last Week Tonight. I think his most recent segment was on plastics, including what happens to recycled plastic. The answer is little of it actually gets recycled, and much of it ends up in unauthorized landfills in developing countries. Okay, so essentially the U.S. exports its plastic trash overseas, where it pollutes some other country. Okay, it's a complicated issue. Recycling of some materials has a positive benefit on society beyond yourself. Okay, recycling metals, recycling, I think, paper, um, reduces pollution in the world overall. Fire protection. I think I've talked about back in the olden days, individual people would purchase fire protection for their own homes. And it was a subscription service. I would pay a fee each year or each month to a fire company. And if my house caught on fire, someone would notify the fire company, and they would come and extinguish the fire. Usually the fire companies were also provided insurance against fire, which was good at aligning their interests. Like, it motivated them to come and extinguish the fire. Okay? Or you could think of this as, when I purchase insurance against fire, it comes with a bonus of fire protection. So that if my house catches on fire, the fire company will come as quickly as they can and try to salvage as much of my stuff as they can. Anyhow, the two things were connected. However, there's the issue of externalities. The positive externality of fire protection is that if I make my home safe against fire, there is a lower risk of the fire spreading to my neighbors. And the like large scale of this are the wildfires, especially out west during the summers, where one person protecting against fire saves everyone else. Okay, careless fire behavior has a large impact on other people. The final thing, honeybees. Okay, economists like to talk about honeybees as an example of an externality because beekeepers keep bees in order to produce honey. Okay, That's what they do. But in the process of producing honey, bees provide a service. What is it that bees do in addition to just making honey? They are important in the ecosystem to do, yeah, pollinate, right? They pollinate things, and they pollinate other crops, right? So if you're a farmer living next to a beekeeper, that provides a benefit to you. Um, yeah. Now, it's a positive externality. It's not something the beekeeper gets. It's something that sort of inadvertently or indirectly impacts someone else. Okay, so let me talk about my market, the same market that I did earlier with the widgets and different people who produce widgets. And imagine there is a negative externality. Every time a widget gets produced, it causes $40 of damage to someone else. Do you have a? Okay. It causes $40 of damage to the environment. So again, this is the same table that I had before for widgets, the value, the cost, and then the external damage or the negative externality. If we take this table and calculate the surplus from producing each widget, well, if one widget gets produced, it goes to a person who has a value of $130. It costs $40 to produce. Then the externality, $40 of damage. So the total surplus generated is 130 minus 40 minus 40. It's $50 of surplus. And the second widget, you know, it goes to someone who values it at $120. It would cost $60 to produce, $40 of damage to the environment, and so it produces $20 of total surplus if we count the value that goes to everyone in society. Okay. Then when it comes to the third widget, the total surplus is negative $10. It's negative. The fourth widget, negative $40 of surplus, and so forth. Okay, so this is just a setup, and this would apply. This is true, or a starting point for analyzing the economy, whether a social planner takes care of the economy or the market does. If the social planner is running the economy, the social planner thinks about what maximizes total surplus for everyone in the economy. The first widget brings $130 of value to someone. It costs $40 to produce. It causes $40 of damage. Therefore, the final result is it brings $50 of surplus to society. Similarly, the second widget, $120 of value, $60 of cost, $40 of environmental damage, brings $20 total value to society. So both of those are worth producing. They benefit society. But when it comes to the third widget, producing the third widget would hurt society overall. You know, the total surplus is negative. So the social planner says nope to the third widget, fourth widget, fifth widget, sixth widget. The social planner would say producing two widgets maximizes total surplus in this economy or in this country. Okay, and that's correct. Okay, this is the efficient outcome, maximizes total surplus. Okay, but in the market, nothing's changed. I mean, basically, if this is a free market, all that matters are the values to consumers and the cost to producers. We have the same demand curve generated by those values, same supply curve generated by these costs. And if we let the market do things, the market will still have an equilibrium price of $100, where where um, where 4 widgets are produced. Okay, all the people involved in the market are happy with that outcome. But again, it's causing damage to other people. So the market outcome remains, just to be clear, Q star is 4. If we let the free market do its thing, it would produce 4 widgets. And so here's the general result for negative externalities. What would happen in a free market, or what would get produced in a free market, is more than what is socially optimal. Okay? There's overproduction of things that cause negative externalities. There's overproduction of things causing pollution, for example, because neither the producer nor the seller takes into account the externalities. And you know, economists do kind of recognize there's this trade-off between what's like, and what I'm trying to address here with efficiency is we shouldn't, if we're interested in making society as happy as we can, we shouldn't ban all behavior that causes externalities. We can't come out and say you may not do anything that pollutes the environment. We have to do a trade-off. Like, what's the value to someone of this polluting activity? And is the value high enough that it justifies a small level of pollution? That's what the social planner was thinking about. Okay, and the social planner concluded in this market that producing 2 widgets, the value to consumers was high enough that it justified some pollution. But again, the free market doesn't care about that, doesn't care about that trade-off. And it's just like, meh, pollute, who cares? So probably this is no surprise, right? Now let's flip this around and have a market with, a positive externality. Consuming the good creates positive benefit for people around. Um, you so here I've written down this externality is plus $30. Okay, so what are things that we do that create positive externalities? I mean, think of the beekeeper, for example. When the beekeeper has the beekeeping farm, it's called an apiary, I think is the name for a bee farm. It provides benefit to neighboring farmers. Okay, so maybe it increases, or each of these bee farms provides $30 of benefit to neighboring fruit orchards. So, the producing 1 widget, it brings $130 of value to a consumer. It costs $40 to produce. Now, there's an external benefit. Okay, so when I say external benefit, it's the same thing as a positive externality. There's a positive externality of $30 or an external benefit of $30, and then we can add up the total surplus. 130 minus 40 of cost plus 30 of external benefit equals $110 of total surplus generated. Okay, and we can fill out the rest of the table the same way. Okay, here's the total surplus generated. Wait, 120? 160? Yeah, it was 120. I'm sorry, my math was wrong in the last slide. Okay, so first widget produces $120 of total surplus. Second, 90, and so forth. Okay, here's that complete table. Then if the social plan were to approach this and think about what will be best for society, well, the four four widgets would get produced by the market anyhow, but the fifth widget might as well be produced because it brings zero total surplus, but might as well go ahead and produce that. Okay, like if we're applying the same criteria as before, go ahead and produce as long as the total surplus is not negative. The social planner would say we should produce 5 widgets in this market. Okay. It is worth producing the 5th widget. The free market would not do that. Okay. Free market, the value of that 5th widget to someone is $90. The cost of producing it is $120. That buyer and that seller would not agree to that transaction. However, it would be in the interest of society overall. The buyer and seller, between the two of them, would lose $30, but all of these widgets are providing $30 of benefit to other people as well. So here's kind of the bottom line. In the market, again, Q star would be 4. If we let buyers and sellers find an equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity, 4 widgets would be sold. But the socially optimal quantity is 5. And this is, again, generally the result when there's a positive externality. What gets produced in the market, Q star, is less than what is socially optimal. What people would choose to buy and sell if it's just left up to them is less than what's socially optimal. We don't do enough of things that create positive externalities. Okay, does this make sense? Yeah.
I just had a question. So when we're talking about externalities, you said it's like an ideal market when there isn't any externalities.
Right.
But if there is a positive externality, wouldn't that make the market better, or does it not change it?
Okay. So I said in an ideal market, and you're saying, well, isn't this even better than an ideal market? Ideal was maybe a poor word given your interpretation. This is not better than ideal. I would say it's different from the ideal. The simple market has no externalities. But yes, here's a market where there is a benefit to others. However, the final result is not ideal in the sense that what the market would do doesn't take advantage of all the potential benefits. So it's not ideal, like in the final result, because there is an extra benefit. People are not taking advantage of it. Okay. So, good on this? Okay.